Your first step when factoring is to always look for a GCF. When I look at 2x squared plus x minus 15, I notice that the only number that all three terms have in common is 1. When 1 is your greatest common factor, we say that we don't have a GCF. Because if I factor a 1 out, all the numbers will stay the same. So then we can move on to the area model. So for the area model, I'm going to go ahead and draw a box. My first term goes in the first box, and my last term goes in the last box. Then you multiply your first number by your last number. So 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. So that means that I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and that add to my middle term of x. When we talk about adding to your middle term, we really just want to know the coefficient of the middle term. The coefficient of x here is 1. So we're looking for factors of negative 30 that add to 1. If you struggle with finding the factors, then I recommend that you write out a list. So let's write out our list of factors of 30. The numbers that multiply to 30 are 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6. Now I want this to be a negative 30. In order to get a negative number with multiplication, one number needs to be positive and one number needs to be negative. And I want those numbers to add to 1. So I need to figure out which pair could give me 1. Well, that could be 5 times 6. Now, 5 times 6 is 30, so I need to figure out how to get negative 30 and a positive 1. What if I do negative 5? Let's see. Negative 5 times 6 is negative 30, and negative 5 plus 6 is positive 1. So those are the numbers that I'm going to write in these two boxes. Order doesn't matter when you plug in here. So I'm going to write my negative 5 here and my 6 here. My middle term has an x, so both of these terms get an x. Now I can go ahead and find the GCF of each row in each column. The GCF, or greatest common factor, of this top row is x. The greatest common factor of this bottom row is 3. The greatest common factor of this left column is 2x, and the greatest common factor of my left column is 5. The wonderful thing about factoring is you can always check your work. X times 2x is 2x squared. That works. X times 5 is positive 5x. I have this negative sign here, so I just found that I made a mistake. How can I fix this? Well, if I make this 5 negative, now it will work. Let's see. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. Now that works. 3 times 2x is 6x. That works. 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. That works. So 2x squared plus x minus 15 in factored form is x plus 3 times 2x minus 5. Now if you wrote the factors in the opposite order, so if you wrote 2x minus 5 times x plus 3, that would also be a correct answer. Let's try another one. So again, your very first step is to look for a GCF. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find a GCF for this trinomial. This trinomial does have a GCF. The GCF here is 2. So I can factor that out. 2 times what would give me 2x squared? Well, that would be x squared. 2 times what would give me 12x? Well, that would be 6x. 2 times what would give me 16? Well, that's 8. Because if I distribute this, 2 times 2x is 2x squared, 2 times 6x is 12x, and 2 times 8 is 16. So now that I found a GCF and I factored that out, next I want to factor completely, meaning I have to factor what's inside parentheses here. To do that, I'm going to use the area model. So here's my box for the area model. First term goes in the first box. Last term goes in the last box. You always multiply your first number by your last number. So 1 times 8 is 8. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 8 and that add to my middle term of 6. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find the factors of 8 that add to 6. If you're having a hard time finding the factors, I recommend that you write out your list. The factors of 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. So the factor pair that's going to work is 2 and 4 because 2 times 4 is 8 and 2 plus 4 is 6. Remember, the numbers that you put here need to be the same. Order does not matter when you put it into the box. So I'm going to have a 2x and a 4x. Both of these boxes get an x because my middle term has an x. So now I'm going to find the GCF of each row and of each column. The GCF in the top row is x. The GCF in the bottom row is 4. The GCF on the left side is x. And the GCF on the right side is 2. Let's check our work. X times x is x squared. That works. X times 2 is 2x. That works. 4 times x is 4x. That works. 4 times 2 is 8. That works. So when we factored to begin with, we got a GCF of 2. I need to write that down because it's a part of my answer. Now I have a factor of x plus 4 and a factor of x plus 2. If you have these factors switched, that's more than okay. This is my answer. Let's try one more. So again, your very first step when factoring is to always look for a greatest common factor. So go ahead and look at this trinomial. I know it's a trinomial because I have 1, 2, 3 terms. And I want you to see if there is a GCF. You should have found that there is a GCF of 3. So when you go to factor out the 3, you'll have 9x squared minus 6x plus 1. Again, we can check our work to see if we did it correctly. 3 times 9x squared is 27x squared. 3 times negative 6x is negative 18x. And 3 times 1 is 3. So I know that 3 is going to be a part of my answer. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. That way I don't forget about it. Next, I want to factor completely, meaning I want to factor what's inside parentheses here. To do that, I'm going to use the area model. So my first term is going to go in the first box, and my last term is going to go in the last box. You always multiply the first number by the last number. 9 times 1 is 9. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 9 that add to my middle term of negative 6. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with those two numbers. The factors of 9 that add to negative 6 are negative 3 times negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. So I'm going to go ahead and write those in the empty spaces in my box. Here I know that each of these terms are going to get an x because my middle term has an x. Now that the box is completely filled out, I can go ahead and factor it. The greatest common factor in my top row is 3x. The greatest common factor in my bottom row is 1. The greatest common factor on the left side is 3x. The greatest common factor on the right side is 1. Now we can check our work. 3x times 3x is 9x squared. 3x times 1 is negative 3x, or is positive 3x, but I have a negative 3x here. So that means that this 1 needs to be negative. Now that will work. 1 times 3x is positive 3x. Again, I have a negative here, so this needs to be negative. Negative 1 times 3x is negative 3x. Now that works. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. That works. So in factored form, this is going to be 3x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. This is my answer. Because I have two 3x minus 1's here, I could also write my answer as 3 for my GCF out in front times 3x minus 1 squared because I have two of them. So you could write your answer either way. Be careful on multiple choice questions because the answer might be written like this, and so you need to know that these are equivalent forms.